Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on what time you're listening to this. But today we're going to cover the life in ancient Guam. So let's move on to the next slide. Objectives: explain how the Chamorros lived during the 1500s and beyond. Interpret why Chamorros lived the way they did. So I talked to you guys last class that there's not much recorded about the Chamorros beyond 1500s. So although this topic says life in ancient Guam, keep in mind that most of these are from 500 years ago. And these are going to be in the perspective of the Spanish. Like what this is what they saw when they arrived here. This was what's happening when they got here. And of course, we cannot tell whether they actually asked the Chamorros how they lived in the past and all that stuff. We can never tell those things because there's nothing recorded about them, right? So what we know is like basically like a lot of these things are what they saw when they got to Guam. So these are some notes that we need to keep in mind before we watch this presentation. We can really tell how the ancient Chamorros lived because we have no records about it. The only way to tell that is through looking at Chamorro artifacts. So we saw a lot of Chamorro artifacts last class. We talked about Retidian and all that stuff. But other than looking at those artifacts like Retidian, it's really hard to tell like how the actual ancient Chamorros lived beyond the 15th century, right? So that's why like overall, like we're going to be mostly looking at what the Spanish saw when they got here in Guam. And there will be a lot of misinterpretations in the Spanish point of view that I will be correcting. Because when they got here, there were a lot of things that they said about the Chamorros that they only based on upon what they saw, but they did not understand what they were seeing at the same time. Like remember, even like when they got here, when Magellan got here first time, like it did not even understand like how Chamorros like viewed like what happened in the ship and all that stuff. Like it did not try to understand their point of view, and instead based all of his like whatever happened that day on his opinion. The next one is I'm just going to talk about a little bit the new spelling in Guam for Chamorros now with the capital CH, Chamorro. However, many islanders from Saipan disagree with this. But for this class, we're just gonna keep using the traditional spelling. But if you do want to spell it with the way that's currently spelled right now, like the way they changed it into, then you're more than welcome to do that. But however you spell it, it's fine with me in this class. But make sure when you're in a Chamorro class to make sure to spell it the way your Chamorro teacher tells you to spell it, okay? The book says that we're going to learn is about ancient Chamorros, but in reality, these are the Chamorros that they encountered since 1500s. So I was talking about that again earlier at this beginning of this presentation, how most of the things that we're going to learn about today are from 500 years ago. And we cannot tell which one is actually an ancient tradition because at this time, keep in mind, these are what the Spanish saw. This is what they interviewed the Chamorros about, and these are what's recorded. So let's start. So according to the Spanish documents, this is what the Chamorros look like. They were tall and well built. This is for men, light brown skin, straight black hair, knotted on the top of the head. You see a lot of Chamorro men still doing this today or with long hair. Actually, I wasn't able to put it here, but the book also said that a lot of Chamorro men, they were not all fit. But of course, there are also Chamorro men that were a little bit older, which is understood, like understandable. Like when they're a little bit older, they had like bigger stomachs already. And you will learn more about it when we talk about their diet. And women, attractive and very graceful. So like a lot of this like are usually like what the Chamorros look like until today. But remember like since then like there's no more pure Chamorro, like what people would call pure Chamorro. Ever since the Spanish came here, they were intermarried with the Spanish, and ever since when the Americans came here, they were like the Chamorros were intermarried with the Americans, and then same thing when the Japanese came here, and then When the island opened up to more immigration, it got mixed up too with other races like Asian races, Filipino races. Oh, I forgot about Filipino races. Like actually, ever since like the Spanish first came here, there were already Filipinos. So that's why like you can see like a lot of similarities and resemblance between the Chamorros and Filipinos because of that. So clothing. This is actually a woman right here. This is a drawn figure about a woman that time. And so due to a warm climate, the Chamorros needed very clothing. So this is actually very understandable because Guam is very hot and Guam has never been like a cold climate before. And so since 1500s and beyond that, like people have been wearing so little clothes, which was understandable, right? Like if I was living in that generation too, like I would do the same thing, right? And there was no shame in terms of uh, being topless because that type of shame usually was a westernized culture. So that's why like you can see like not only in Guam but in a lot of places, not only the island places, but even in Africa, even in some Asian countries, a lot of women did not cover their top because of the weather, right? And once again, that was also a European point of view that you had to cover every part of it. And the men did not wear any covering. Of course, like you can see that a lot of men actually wore the same thing as this woman right here, but like according to the book, the men did not wear anything. The woman wore a triangular apron called tipi, made from gunut. Gunut is the coconut, what I would say the fruit, coconut fruit. And of course, when you chop the coconut, and half of that is called a gunut. Men often carried carved walking sticks called tunas. I'm not sure if it's pronounced as tunas, but of course, it's not tunas. Tuna is like from the ocean. Women often decorated themselves with flour and shells when there was a feast, and made belts of coconuts which they wore over their skirts. So you can see a lot of islanders, not only Chamorros, like putting flowers on their ears, on their hair, and that's actually very beautiful, right? I feel like that's actually a very beautiful part of the Pacific culture that women always decorated themselves with flowers, and they always did that whenever there was fiesta because like that was their way of like trying to look good. And of course like naturally like women dress for themselves to feel good about themselves, not to really like show off to other people. So work. Men built houses and made canoe, also raised food in gardens, hunted birds, crabs, fish, and fruit bats. Women kept their homes, cook house cook houses and yard neat and clean. And they took care of the children and cooked the meals. They also wove mats, nets, baskets, and possibly pottery. So there was a gender role between men and women at this time. And today, there a lot of these gender roles still exist at home, right? So you might notice that you're the one washing the dishes always because you're the girl in the house, or your brother is the one doing the bush cutting. This has been always part of the culture, and this has never been a problem in the Chamorro culture until it mostly got influenced by Western culture, until the Westerners started to point it out, like, hey, how come women were the only ones that are doing this? Or like, hey, how come men are the only ones doing this? So especially with modern culture, like how it points out, like, oh yeah, am I not allowed to do this because I'm a man? Am I stuck with doing this because I'm a woman? Well, that's still a huge misunderstanding because at this time they just divided the work, and like it would be too confusing if one person is doing everything, and that would be too tiring. So they needed to divide the work, and keep in mind that these type of work were also given because of self-fulfillment. And like what about you, like in your house, right? Like, of course, if there's no video games and anything at all, you would probably feel compelled that you needed to do something to you, right? So that was the same thing back then. And this is one thing that actually is very important, and let me tell you this. When the Spanish got here in Guam, They thought that the Chamorros were lazy, they kept sleeping, and all that stuff. So think about it. Were the Chamorros really lazy, right? And isn't that really offensive to say? Isn't that really offensive to get from something that you don't know? Like honestly, like me, like if I'm working my butt off towards the day or throughout the day, and somebody calls me lazy, I would probably really get mad, right? So that was the same thing to them. Like the Chamorros were widely misunderstood with the time they work and all that stuff, that they were considered lazy. But let me tell you this. This is why this was a huge misunderstanding. In Spain at this time, there was this thing called the work hours, right? So typically in Guam, right now, like people usually work between 8 to 10 hours. So that was the same thing in Spain. But here in Guam, it's super different because the weather is so hot. So this is how the Chamorros worked. They would wake up like at 6 a.m. in the morning, and then they would work until 11 a.m. And what time is the hottest part of the day here in Guam? Between 12 to 3 p.m., right? So usually the Chamorros rested, not only Chamorros, actually, a lot of islanders from other islands did the same thing. They usually rested from 12 to 3 p.m. or maybe like 12 to 4 p.m. because those were the times when it was really hot. And after that, when it wasn't that hot anymore, what they did after that was they came back to work. So if you actually put it in a different perspective, the Chamorros were working more than 8 hours a day compared to what the Spanish has seen. But the Spanish thought like, oh, you guys are already done work at 11 a.m. You guys are so lazy, kind of stuff like that. And that is why that is such a huge misunderstanding again. The Spanish did not know what the heck they were saying, right? Food and cooking. So yam. So I talked about yam last class. Yam is actually in some Micronesian islands like Yap. I'm not sure about Pohnpei, but Kusrai might have it too. Or not exactly. I'm not exactly sure where yam is at, but it could be in every island nowadays. But that time, Chamorros planted yams, which gave a lot of experts the speculation that the Chamorros came from South America because of that yam, right? But remember, I disagreed with that because of genetics. And bananas, breadfruit. So these are the type of fruit that we can see in the islands, especially breadfruit, taro, and some rice were the main commodity in the land. Note, the Chamorros were the only Pacific Islanders who grew rice. So if you're Chamorro, let's say you're Chamorro and then let's say you eat a lot of rice, right? Like you say, like nowadays, like they say like, oh, I love to eat rice because I'm Asian. That's an Asian life. I even hear like some Chamorro say like, oh, I'm like Asian because I like to eat rice. No, I feel like that's something more to be proud as a Chamorro because Chamorros were the only ones that were planting rice, right? So why not just say, oh, it's because I'm Chamorro. I love rice because my ancestors always loved rice. You don't really have to stray away from your own culture in terms of rice. So if you're Chamorro, that's something to keep in mind. Chamorros also ate crabs, lobsters, clams, oysters, shrimp, and fish. This is actually very good diet right there. Very good diet in terms of just really good food because I'm a seafood lover. So I'm like craving for a lobster right now, like looking at this picture right here. But anyway, this was super good. Like, can you just imagine like how good it was to live at this time? Like nighttime, you and your family are just chilling near the beach because the houses were located near the beach, and you're just chilling all day, like all night, like eating a lobster. Like, wow, that is so good. And note, they did not have chickens or pigs yet. Do you know why? If you said that the Spanish were the ones that brought them here, you're definitely correct. Well, of course, we're not really sure where the chickens or pigs came from. There's a lot of them in the world. Some people are speculating that the Spanish brought them from South America, but we cannot exactly say where they came from because there's a lot of chickens in the world, right? Cooking style, broiling, grilling, open fire. So if you're familiar with this cooking style, yes, Chamorro's always grilled already, even in the past. So containers. So like these are some examples in the pictures. This bamboo right here was always used to carry water. And this pottery, like this is a, what do you call this? I guess it's some type of bowl from coconut leaves. But anyway, these were, every container were used to carry something, right? And I'm not sure what Asian countries still do this today, but if you ever watch some Asian countries, like movies from Asian countries, they still do this, but we're not really sure anymore. Homes, they were very neat and well made compared to all other Pacific islands. This was in the point of view of Spanish. Like, wow, compared to all the Pacific islands that we've seen so far, the Chamorros built their houses so uniquely compared to everyone else. The houses were built above high ground and rested on wooden posts or pillars of stone. These are called the latte stones. So you can see over here, or typically like a Chamorro house, like an ancient Chamorro house, there are at least 8 pillars of latte stones before they would build the whole thing, right? And whenever these pillars are present, means the house is super sturdy. You know, like what they say about like foundation, like it depends on the foundation how strong the house would hold. And if these houses were built without the latte stones and the flood would come, they would easily sink, right? So that's why like these were the type of houses that protected the Chamorros from a lot of things. Could be flooding, could be an earthquake. Of course, there weren't a lot of earthquake that time yet, but it protected them from a lot of things, even from a typhoon, because it made the house really sturdy because it held the house together. Chamorros often cut them out of limestones and volcanic rock, so they use this specific tool to cut some volcanic rock and limestones. If you try to cut limestones nowadays, that's actually very hard because limestones were actually made from corals that were there that were underwater like more than 500 years ago. So that was actually difficult. But Chamorros were really hardworking people, so they were able to do these things. And keep in mind, they were really strong, very strong. So cooking house, they often build those often next to their laddie's house. So there will be like a smaller house next to the big house because women prepared to have their own cooking place and they would usually eat inside the kitchen of their homes. And actually, I was wondering, this was actually a little bit like, I felt like kind of dumb at that time, I guess. Like I was like, oh, how did it get up there? Like, well, hello, just use a ladder, right? That's why you can see over here they have a ladder. All the Chamorro houses that time had a ladder. That's if they bought their houses this high. I mean, built, not bought. So villages, families often build their houses a little bit distance from other families, so to separate themselves, not to really like, oh, because I don't like that other family or something like that, but it's because of also resources and to mainly keep the families like within the houses. Like you don't really want to be too close with other families' businesses, right? Like you don't want to hear what they're arguing about and all that stuff. Chamorros either build their houses by the beach or marshlands. Marshlands are basically like a grassy area that's a little bit like it's like a type of land where it's easier to plant. That's why a lot of Chamorros did that. And houses by the beach, like wow, just imagine like how beautiful it was to live by the beach, right? Nowadays, like if you try to live by the beach, it would be so expensive. You have to be like some type of millionaire. But before, that's what the Chamorros did because it was so comfortable to live by the beach. And the oceans is just right there. So if you wake up in the morning, you don't have to travel far to the ocean. Like, I mean, like, of course, they didn't have like cars or whatever transportation back then. But anyway, like, it was just right there. And their canoe was there. and their canoe headed to the middle of the ocean to fish. So this is how villages came up to be. Once the children get married, they would build another house for them. So let's say I have children, right? And my children get married. And because I don't want them to live far away from me, I would build their house right next to mine. Like, what's the point of them living far away from me? Because we can all just be together, right? And that tradition just was applied to every children that they had. And I'm not really sure how many Chamorros were in how many children the Chamorros had in average, but we could say maybe 4 or 5. So it could be like, okay, let's say I have 5 children, and I would make sure that my 5 children live next to me, and then each of those children will have their own children, and they will keep passing by to the next generation. So like 3 generations or 5 generations, that's already a lot of houses around, and that could already be considered a village. So to differentiate like the definition of village from today and back then, like villages were again mostly families with like a few generations. Unlike today, like village, the definition of village is mostly westernized. Like village is like, oh, the size of this land, and then depending on the population, it doesn't really have to do with family anymore. So this tradition passed down through the generations, and by the Spanish arrival, there were already almost 200 villages. To be more specific, there were about 180 of them. That's about 180 families when they got here. And we don't know, right? Because 180 family, like each family could consist of like hundreds of people already. So objectives. Explain how Chamorros lived during 1500s and beyond. Did we do that? Well, that was the whole topic, right? Interpret why Chamorros lived the way they did. So I explained to you why they were resting in the middle of the day, why they built their houses like that. So we were definitely able to interpret why the Chamorros lived the way they did. So keep in mind there are things for you to answer after this video, and this video is mostly meant for those people that are not able to attend class. But anyway, please answer the question after watching this video.